Welcome to Bitesized Audio. I'm Simon Stanhope. I'm an actor and audiobook narrator, and I've recorded all the stories on this channel. Classic English short stories, mostly from the Victorian and Edwardian eras. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment if you'd like to, and thank you for listening. The Curious Circumstances of the Two Left Shoes, by Ernest Bramah. Read by Simon Stanhope. At the time when the Enderleys lost their silver, the monkey burglar was at the height of his fame. The monkey burglar, should you by this date have forgotten, was the one who invariably gained access by leaping from a tree onto an upper-story window-sill. So strong was habit that there were said to be cases of the monkey burglar going through this performance at houses where the front door stood open, or where a builder's ladder, left in position overnight, was reared against the very point he gained by the more sensational flight. During the thick of the burglary season that year, each number of Punch regularly contained one or more jokes about the monkey. No pantomime was complete without a few references to him, and the burgled invariably tried to claim distinction as authentic victims. In this, the press, to do it justice, worthily seconded their endeavours. The Enderleys lived near Silver Park at that time, in one of the old-fashioned cottages that have long, delightful gardens running down to the river edge. They were a young couple, setting themselves a very moderate standard, until the day when Enderley's wonderful qualities should be suitably recognised by a partnership. In the meanwhile, he was something exceptionally responsible, but not so exceptionally rewarded, in connection with a firm of estate agents and surveyors. Max Carrados had heard of him favourably from one or two friends, and was not unwilling to put business in the young man's way. An opportunity came when the blind criminologist had, as trustee, to deal with an estate down in Warwickshire. He ascertained that Enderley was not debarred from doing work on his own account, and gave him a commission to inspect the property and make a general report. Business being slack, there was no difficulty in arranging a few days' leave of absence from the office, and the proposal was gratefully accepted. On his return, he had conscientiously managed to cover the ground within 2 days. Enderley looked in at the turrets before proceeding home, and found Mr. Carrados at leisure. "I thought that I would leave the report with you now," he explained, "in case you cared to glance over it and ask me about any details while it's all fresh in my mind. I wrote up my notes in the train on the way back." "Good man," smiled Carrados, accepting the docket. "I should have liked you to stay while we discussed the matter, but I am afraid that someone else has a prior lien on your time." "In what way?" "A few hours ago, Mrs. Enderley rang me up on the phone, and there is what I might describe as a standing order for you to communicate with her from here at the earliest moment." "Good heavens!" exclaimed Enderley in some trepidation. "What's up, I wonder? Nothing wrong that you know of?" "Nothing at all," replied Carrados, with reassuring unconcern. "Your wife was in exceptional spirits, I gathered, but somewhat cryptical. However, there is the means of setting your mind at rest," and he indicated the instrument. "I'll leave you to it. Please don't go." Enderley seemed to be toying with the moment, as if rather unwilling to set his mind at rest. "I was startled for a second, but if my wife herself spoke to you, there can't be anything much the matter. The fact is," he confided with a certain shy complacency, "she has been getting rather fanciful of late. Not an unusual phase of the situation, I understand." Mr. Carrados murmured his discreet congratulations, and his visitor summed up enough indifference to make the call. "Holy Moses!" the blind man heard him mutter, and there followed a rapid fusillade of "How?" and "When?" and "What?" and "You don't mean it!" all indicating consternation and surprise, as long as the colloquy lasted. "Here's a pretty go," announced Mr. Enderley, hanging up the receiver. "We've been burgled." "The deuce!" exclaimed Carrados sympathetically. "I hope your wife isn't much upset." "No, I don't think so. In fact, she seems rather set up, because some of our neighbours were robbed in a very commonplace way lately, and she's determined that this must have been the authentic monkey." "Much taken?" "Apparently the silver chest, and nothing else. Myra rather fancied that I would call here on my way from something I'd said. That's why she rang you up, and she wants me to go straight on. I hope you don't mind." "Of course not. I had hoped that you would keep me company for an hour or two, but that's out of the question now. I'll tell you what, though. I will make a bargain with you. Stay another 15 minutes, in which we can have a snack of some kind in place of dinner. In the meanwhile, I will have a car got out that will land you at your place quicker than any other way you could go, and in return you shall invite me to inspect the depredation." "Well, that's certainly a bargain from my side of the transaction," replied Enderley. "If it isn't putting you out, I'll accept like a shot." "Not a bit," declared his host, with more than polite formality. He moved across to the house telephone and quickly distributed the necessary orders. "I love anything that comes suddenly along. It may be the beginning of what adventure?" "Well, as to that, of course, there are two sides," said the domesticated Enderley. "This is quite sudden enough for me, but I certainly don't love it." Carrados was as good as his literal word, and 15 minutes after he had spoken, the lean form of his speedy Redshank car glided down the drive into the high road, and then stretched out for Silver Park. "Now that it's come to this, I may as well tell you about our silver," explained Mr. Enderley to his companion on a confidential impulse. "We happen to have rather a lot, more than people in our modest way generally sport, I mean. Myra's father was a fruit grower, and won a lot of cups and plates in his time. I used to be something of a runner, and I amassed a few more, and when we got married, our friends showered cruets and cake baskets down on us galore. The consequence is that there was a solid 1/2 hundredweight of the metal reposing in a specially made case in the dining-room at Holmcroft. Of course, it ought to have been kept at the bank, and at first it was, but Myra liked to see an assortment out on the sideboard, so that it got to be a nuisance, sending it backwards and forwards. Then I said that if we had it in the house, it ought to be kept up in the bedroom for safety, and Myra found that she couldn't even lift the chest, and decided that it would be too inconvenient to have it there. What with one thing and another, the confounded silver got to become a bit of a sore point between us. It brought on the first unpleasantness we had. Then, as bad luck would have it, just when I was leaving the other morning to go on this job, we must needs get arguing about it again. I suggested that as there would be only 2 women alone in the house, herself and the servant, it would be safer if I carried the box up and hid it under the bed. Myra, God knows why, retorted that if the silver was the danger point, it wasn't very kind to want to put it just under where she would be. One silly word led to another, until I finally went off saying that I wished the damned stuff was at the bottom of the river. "Well, you seem to have got the next thing to what you asked for, then," remarked Carrados. "The silver apparently won't trouble you again." But Enderley demurred at this cheerful summary, and shook his head. "Oh, yes," he replied, "but when you wish a thing like that, you don't really mean that you want it to happen." "You are insured, I suppose?" "Well, only partly, I'm afraid, because the value of the silver now exceeds the percentage allowed. And, of course, a lot of the things have associations, although there is nothing of antique value. I'm really wondering how Myra will take it when the excitement wears off." But so far the excitement was on, and she welcomed them radiantly, albeit a shade mystified that Mr. Carrados should have chosen that moment to pay his call. It does not say much for the criminal expert's sense of publicity that neither his host nor hostess had the faintest idea of his uncanny reputation. To them, he was simply the rich blind man, who seemed as though he might be useful to Guy. "But isn't it a shame, Mr. Carrados?" she cooed, when the first round of wonder and exclamation had been gone through. "Sergeant Lapworth declares that it can't possibly be the monkey burglar, and I was so relying on that to squelch the Higgses with." Carrados divined an exchange of private glances, expostulatory from the husband, playfully defiant on her part. "I have met Sergeant Lapworth once or twice, and he seemed to know his work," said the visitor. "Did he say why it couldn't be?" "Well, the only way they could have got in was by the side door. No fastenings have been forced or windows opened, and the monkey wouldn't ever dream of using a side door." "But how on earth could they do that?" demanded Enderley. "I mean, without using force. Chloe fastens the door at night, doesn't she?" "I'll show you, if you don't mind accompanying me to the nether regions," said the light-hearted girl. "Chloe only locks the door, it seems. The bolts are too stiff to work, and Sergeant Lapworth says that these people, he's almost sure he knows the gang, have all manner of ingenious tools. There's a sort of pincers that you catch hold of a key with from the other side and turn it quite easily. You can see that the lock has been oiled to make it go." "You found the door unlocked this morning?" "No. I don't know. I never thought of that. But I suppose they could just as easily lock it again to cover their tracks, and as it happened, it was not until this afternoon that I missed the silver chest. Then there are footprints on the bed from the gate to the side door. He found those as well. It's most wildly exciting discovering clues. I've been looking for some all the afternoon, but so far without success." "Come on, then," suggested Enderley. "You have a lamp or candle, I suppose?" "Yes. Do you care to see our private morgue, Mr. Carrados? Oh, I am sorry. I forgot." "That's very nice of you, to forget," smiled the blind man. "It shows that I am not so helpless after all. Certainly I should like to come. I'm as keen on clues as you are." The side door was the chief point of interest. It opened onto the garden from the scullery. The scullery, a dank and forbidding chamber that almost justified its epithet, in turn led into the kitchen, and the kitchen into the hall. But there were other ways of getting about, for it was an old house with many passages, and on various levels. Most of the rooms appeared to have at least 2 doors. "I think that the man who built it must have been fond of French farces," remarked Mr. Enderley, pointing out this feature. But even at the side door there was very little to see, the Enderley burglary being chiefly remarkable for its negative features. There was the oiled lock, and the key bore certain recent scratches, and that was all. "If the bolts had been shot, this would never have happened," said the master of the house. "Perhaps in future—" "But the bolts can't be stirred, dear," protested Myra. "I've tried myself, until my poor thumbs are nearly dislocated, and everyone says that if burglars want to get in, they will, even if they have to come down the chimney." "I think the bolts might move if they were simply oiled," suggested Carrados. "The level is all right, you see." "Chloe," called out Mr. Enderley. The kitchen door stood open. "Is there any oil about?" A young girl in cap and apron, a girl of quite unusual prettiness, appeared at the door. "Oil, sir?" she repeated faintly, and she continued to look from one to another of them, as though something was amiss. "Yes, oil, ordinary oil, the sort you oil with, you know. There must be some about somewhere." "Oh, yes, for the sewing machine," she replied, and disappeared, to return with it in a moment. "Now a feather." The girl's eyes shot to a bucket holding kitchen refuse that stood beneath the sink. then rose to the level again as she continued to stand there. "Feathers in the middle dresser drawer, Chloe," prompted her mistress tartly. "Bless me," she confided to the others. "The girl's going dotty, I believe. Over-excitement isn't good for our poor sex." "Now we want a chair or something for the top bolt," said Enderley. "I think I can do it without, if you will allow me," put in Carrados. "I fancy that I am just a few inches to the good in that respect." "Oh, but really, Mr. Carrados," protested the lady, "won't you get it on your clothes or something?" "That is only a matter of carelessness, not vision," replied Carrados. He gave the feather a dexterous turn in the neck of the bottle to remove the excess of oil before he withdrew it. "Children have the keenest sight, Mrs. Enderley, and yet look how they drop the jam about." "It's quite marvellous," she murmured, watching him apply the oil and then work the action until the bolt slid easily. "Not so much as you might think," he assured her. "Frequently you are indebted to other senses when you think you are using your eyes, and they get all the credit. Several men have told me that they always close their eyes when they are doing certain delicate adjustments." "I once knew a lady who always shut her eyes before she fired a gun off," contributed Enderley. "Yet she was fond of shooting, and often hit things." "Dogs or keepers?" inquired Myra politely. Certainly the burglary did not seem to have damped anyone's spirits. Presently they went out to look at the incriminating footprints, viewing the body, Myra called it, by candlelight, until they were tired of striking matches, and the friendly darkness put Carrados at liberty to go down on hands and knees and touch the well-marked impressions with his eerily perceptive fingers in his own peculiar way. "What's this? Snowing?" Enderley had exclaimed as he opened the door to lead the way into the garden. A sprinkling of white showed on the bare earth before them. "Goose," retorted Myra fondly. "It's lime, of course. Old Benjamin. He's a sort of local unhandy man, Mr. Carrados, whom Guy employs one day a week to sit in the garden and smoke shag. Put it on only yesterday. He said the soil was too thodden for bulbs. It's always too something for Ben." "It came in useful all the same," said her husband. "You see, the lime being crushed down in the footprints shows that they were made after it was put there. That's important." "Lapworth the sleuth had already diagnosed that, O fountain of wisdom," mocked his wife. She leaned forward and struck him lightly on the arm. "You're it. Race you to the river, Guy." "Shh!" warned Enderley, with a nod towards their guest. "Go, children, run," urged Carrados benignly. "I will follow, at a pace more suited to my years." "Hold up!" cried Myra, limping into a walk before they were fairly off. "I forgot. My feet are as soft as mush today. Besides, I oughtn't to now." "No, of course you oughtn't to," said Guy severely. "And we oughtn't to leave Mr. Carrados like that. God knows what sort of a lunatic asylum he'll think he's dropped on." "Never mind. I got you away. Just one, Guy. And don't worry about him. He said his ears, but he meant his eyes, of course. His ears are sharp enough. That old man wouldn't take any harm if you put him down in the middle of a sawmill." "Old?" exclaimed Mr. Enderley indignantly. "Great Scott! What next?" They walked back to meet the advancing Carrados, and then they all strolled soberly down to the extremity of the garden, and stood contemplating the slow, muddy river, before they turned back again. "You take Mr. Carrados into the dining-room, Guy," said Myra, hastening on ahead as they neared the house. "I'm going up to change my shoes. These are soaked." "Yes, my lady, you are pretty high up already, I'm afraid," apostrophised her husband as they followed. "Well, that's the way of it, Mr. Carrados. I shall think myself lucky if she isn't down below 0 before the night is out." "I've taken hot water up to the spare room, sir," said Chloe, as they passed her in the hall. They washed their hands leisurely and went down to the dining-room. The maid had lit the lamp and was replenishing the fire. Still Mrs. Enderley did not appear. A few minutes passed rather flatly. Enderley made a half-hearted show of asking his guest if he was fond of this and that, but Carrados divined his vague uneasiness, and soon they both frankly waited. "Guy," said a queer little voice, just outside the door. It had been left somewhat ajar. "Do you mind coming here a minute?" Enderley threw a quick, inquiring look across, and the blind man, informed by what sense, who shall say, nodded mute assent. Then the door closed, and Carrados slowly turned his face to the 4 points of the room. It was perhaps 5 minutes later that Enderley returned. He came thoughtfully across the room and stood close to his guest's chair. "It's just as I was afraid," he said, pitching his voice cautiously. "Myra is now at a very minor stage indeed. And a curious thing, curious and trivial, and yet, I must admit, extraordinary, has happened to upset her. It's mixed up with 1 or 2 other matters, and I suppose that this burglary also, although that has nothing to do with it, has helped to put the emotional screw on. If you care to hear, I will tell you with pleasure, especially as you have seen how bright she was a few minutes ago, but I don't want to bore you." "Go on," said Carrados. "Curious and trivial things that are extraordinary have never bored me yet." "Well, you shall judge. I indicated, over at your place, that we are expecting our little household to be increased in the course of a few months. Not unnaturally, Myra has to pass through a variety of new emotions on the subject, and she also has an unfortunate misgiving. It happened that her father was born club-footed, and his father was disfigured in the same way. Of course, we tell her that it's all nonsense, but there is undeniably an element of heredity in that sort of thing, and she knows it well enough. Just now she is doubly prone to take notice of any kind of suggestion or premonition that may come along, especially on that one unlucky possibility. You heard her say that she was going up to change her shoes? Well, this is what has happened. She went upstairs, kicked off her wet shoes, and proceeded to pull on another pair. They are shoes that she has worn quite comfortably at intervals for the past few weeks, but now one, the right foot, would not go on. Thinking nothing of it, she picked up a shoe lift and tried again. Still it refused to accommodate, and then she went to the light and looked more closely. It wasn't likely to fit, Carrados, for the extraordinary thing is that those shoes, which she has worn quite easily and naturally 12 times in the last few weeks, are both for the left foot. There was a rattle of cups and glasses as the attractive maid nearly dropped the tray she was bringing in. Enderley looked sharply round, but the girl kept her face averted, and quickly went out again. "Well, there's another who certainly got the jumps," said her master. "But about those shoes, of course it's ridiculous, but you see the inference. In each forerunning case, it was the right foot that was wrong, and so poor Myra is miraculously endowed with 2 left shoes at this moment, as a sort of admonition that an ordinary right will not be needed. But you don't see anything in it, I expect." "On the contrary," replied Carrados slowly. "I see so much in it, so many 1,000 possibilities, all wrong but one, that I should like to go up into a very large, perfectly bare attic, lit by several 20,000 candle-power arc lamps, and there meditate." "And the nearest thing I can offer you," said Enderley, "is the coal cellar. It's roomy, as such places go, and certainly practically empty now. For the rest—" He found the pleasantry difficult to sustain. "So," continued the blind man seriously, "we must still proceed on directly material lines. I should very much like to handle the pair of shoes that has caused the trouble. Do you think Mrs. Enderley would allow me?" "Why not?" assented the lady's husband. "I'll go and get them." He went, and returned almost immediately, but empty-handed. "She's coming down now. Much better," he whispered in the voice of a conspirator. "Bringing them." And almost at his heels, a sobered Myra reappeared. "I'm a hopeless little rabbit, Mr. Carrados," she apologized. "Please don't say anything nice about it, because I am." "Rabbit?" ejaculated her natural protector loyally. "Rabbit? Why, Mr. Carrados, that sylph has the heart of well, I'm not strong on the faunas, but of whatever is the antithesis of rabbit." "That would be a ferret, wouldn't it?" asked Myra in her funny way. "What a sad flatterer you are, Guy." "Go on," said Guy happily. "So long as you can laugh." She waved a reassuring hand to him across the room as she addressed their guest again. "Of course, I know that he has told you all about it, Mr. Carrados," she said, "because when I texted him, he began by saying, 'I only just.' Here is the mystery." It was a pair of pretty bronze shoes, neat yet not fragile, that she put into the blind man's hands. He held them one by one, and as his long, delicately formed fingers brushed across their surface, the two watchers received a curious impression of seeing something red. I shouldn't mind the shoes a particle," declared Myra. She felt compelled to speak, to break the almost hypnotic quest of those understanding hands. "Though, of course, they're no earthly use. But for weeks I've been wearing them all right, and now I know perfectly well that I couldn't. There's something wrong with me somewhere, don't you see?" "Oh, but dearest," pleaded Guy soothingly, "there's some perfectly simple explanation, if only we could see it. Why, only just now you said that your feet were tender. That's probably it. You've got them sore, and so you can't put on the shoe. If they were all right, you'd jump into them and not notice that anything was the matter, just as you have been doing up to now." "Don't talk Tommy, Guy," she exclaimed, half wrathfully. "As if I could possibly put on two left shoes without knowing it, even if I could get them on. And yet," she wailed, "I have been putting them on. That's the horrible thing about it." Carrados had apparently finished his scrutiny, for he was listening to this exchange in his usual benign complacency, and as he listened, he absently rubbed his nose gently with the polished toe of a shoe. "Set your mind at rest, Mrs. Enderley," he remarked quietly as he offered her the other one. "There is nothing wrong. You have never worn that shoe." "I have never worn it?" "Neither you nor anybody else. The shoe has not been worn." "But look at the wear," she persisted, displaying the scarified sole. "Look at this worn lace." "The lace, yes," he admitted, with unshaken confidence, "but not the shoe." "Oh, but how can you possibly know that?" "In exactly the same way that I could oil the bolt, by using other powers than that of sight." "Do you mean—" began Enderley, but Carrados interrupted him with uplifted hand. "If I may suggest, please don't say anything more about the shoes just yet. At this moment, Sergeant Lapworth has come to the door, and your servant is admitting him. Let us hear what he has to say." Myra and Guy exchanged looks of bewilderment, almost of alarm, and then the girl's face cleared. "Yes," she exclaimed, "I had forgotten to tell you. He did say that he would look in again after you got back, Guy." "If you please, ma'am," said Chloe at the door, "there's the detective here again, and he would like to see the master, if it's convenient." "Quite right," replied Myra. "Show him in here." Sergeant Lapworth was a plain-clothes man of the local staff. If he had a fault, it was that of giving the impression of knowing more than he would tell, a suggestion that resulted in people sometimes finding him less omniscient in the end than they had expected. The Enderleys were rather surprised at the sudden respect that came over him when he recognized their blind visitor. "One or two small matters I thought I'd like to see you about, sir," he said, addressing Mr. Enderley. "Those footprints by the side gate. I understand that no one came along that way between the time your gardener put the lime there yesterday and my seeing them this afternoon."
"That is quite right," agreed Myra.
"We allow the milkman to come in at the front gate and go to the side door, to save him carrying his can right round the other way. No one else came. I asked Chloe particularly." "You see the point, sir," continued the sergeant, directing his voice at Mr. Carrados this time. "Whoever left those footprints is the man we want to put our hands on. We should like him to account for his movements last night, at all events. Old Ben certainly never made those prints, sir. Now, I wonder—" The sergeant's voice became softly speculative, as he leisurely felt in one or two pockets, and finally produced a neat paper template of a boot. "I wonder if this suggests anything to either of you."
Myra shook her head, and passed the paper on to Enderley. "It's a man's boot, I suppose," she said. "It is broader than a woman's, and the heel is twice as large. It's much smaller than any of yours, Guy."
"Lord, yes," he agreed. "I'm miles beyond that." "Perhaps," continued Sergeant Lapworth, becoming almost dreamy in his quiet detachment, "perhaps this might help you more, if you should ever have seen the original." It was a small fancy button that he mysteriously produced this time from the Aladdin's cave among his garments. Myra's spirits went up. "What a splendid clue, Mr. Lapworth!" she exclaimed. "Where did you find it?" "I don't want anything said about it just yet," he stipulated. "As a matter of fact, I picked it up in your scullery this afternoon." "It is a boot button, I suppose?" questioned Enderley. "It strikes me as rather dressy." "It is the top of a pearl boot button, undoubtedly, I should say," pronounced the sergeant. "One of those metal-shanked things that they wire into the boot nowadays. First question is, does it belong to any one of the house? I dare say you have plenty of pairs of fancy boots and shoes in use or put by, but it isn't a button that you would readily forget." Myra breathlessly agreed that if she had had boot buttons like that, she would never have forgotten it, and added that if Guy had appeared with them, she could never have forgiven it, a sotto voce effort that elicited nothing more than an anxious look from her husband. "And how about the young person in the kitchen?" suggested Lapworth. "I know Chloe's boots, and it certainly doesn't come from there," replied Chloe's mistress. "However, you had better ask her to make sure. Shall I ring now?" "Don't trouble," he replied, with a quite spontaneous glance towards the decanters on the table, as he returned the precious relic to its hiding-place. "I can have a word with her as I go out. Now, as regards the silver, your good lady said that you would be able to make me out a list, sir." "Oh, of course," assented Enderley. "That's got to be done, hasn't it? And then there'll be the insurance people, and then a young man introducing himself as the press. I'll tell you what, Sergeant, this being burgled isn't such a soft thing after all." "I don't know, sir. It strikes me that you have come off uncommonly easy, seeing as how things were. No mess, no breakages, no odds and ends from every room that you can't remember until it's too late to claim. Just one big lot taken clean."
"It would be about as much as he could take anyway," said the owner. "I shouldn't like to heft that case far." He casually indicated the group of liquors. "What shall it be, Sergeant?"
"Well, I'll leave that to you, sir," said the sergeant modestly. "Yes, it would be a tidy load. I don't know that I ever remember the case being taken before. Reckon they had a car somewhere near."
"Anyway, nothing was overlooked," said Myra. "There were some tankards out on the sideboard here, and 3 dozen spoons of various sizes in the drawer, and they went too. I put them—"
"You put them what?" prompted her husband, for Myra had stopped, as though she had said her say.
"I haven't the faintest notion, dear," she replied frankly. "To tell the truth, I think I was half asleep. Put what?"
"Well, I think I'll be getting along, sir,"
said Lapworth, reading in this a pretty obvious hint. "As soon as we hear from you—" "Nonsense," interposed Enderley, rather put out at the turn. "Have another first." And he refilled the not altogether inflexible sergeant's glass. There was a hesitating knock at the door, and Chloe entered with a card. "Please, mum," said the girl. Mrs. Enderley happened to be seated nearest to her. "There's a gentleman would like to see the master for a minute." "Witch? Mr. William Witch," read Myra. "Isn't there a Lady Witch a few houses away?" "Trefusis, Lady Witch, madam," volunteered Lapworth. "There is a Mr. William, the son." "I'd better go out and see what it is," said Enderley. "Probably only a minute. Excuse me, won't you?" For so short a gap, it did not seem worthwhile discovering a topic of conversation, and so no one broke the minute's silence. If they had spoken their thoughts, the exchange would have been something after this fashion. "I wonder if Lady Witch ever intends to call. City Knight's widow, I suppose. Now, will Mr. Carrados go when the fat sergeant leaves, or does he expect that we have a proper supper?" "A bit of a card, this Mr. Willie Witch, from what I hear. Old party keeps him in pretty tight, by all accounts. Larky, girls. Damn fine stuff, this Scotch here. Wonder if it'd be all right, if he does give the nod again, for me to—" She must stand 5'5", possibly 6. At that, with the tread she has, she will take a 4½ to 5. Yes, under any vigorous exercise, she might reasonably split a pliant 3½. There were certainly 2 definable personal exudations about the other shoe, and associable with them, Syringa, that's the girl, and Cheiranthus, this one. The door opened, and Enderley entered. Then, standing aside, he waited for someone else. "Rather curious," he announced. "Mr. Witch has come to give us some information about our friend last night. So, as we are all here— My wife, Mr. Witch, Mr. Carrados, Sergeant Lapworth." "It's really from my mother, you know," said the dapper youth who followed the host in. "She's a frightful invalid, heart and all that, so she sent me to tell you. We only just heard of what had happened. Beastly shame." "We didn't know that you'd be interested," ventured Myra graciously. "Eh? Oh, I mean rotten luck, being burgled like that. Well, it seems that last night the mater was having a bad turn, and she had to get up and sit at the open window to have air. That's how it takes her. It seems that from her bedroom window one can see most of your garden. We live a couple of houses along, Trefusis, you know, and as she sat there, she distinctly saw someone go down your garden towards the river, and disappear among the trees. She says she wasn't taking much notice of it at the time, because there was no reason why there should be anything wrong in that, and it being dark, she didn't see a lot, and she was feeling pretty washed out as well. But she did notice that it seemed to be a man carrying something large and heavy, and when she heard of this, she thought you'd better know." "It's most awfully good of Lady Witch to send," gushed Myra, "and of you to come. We are just celebrating the event with frugal hospitality. Will you drink the toast, our absent friend, in whisky, port, or coffee, Mr. Witch?" "Eh? Oh, I don't mind. The first for choice, thank you." "The river," mused Lapworth. "That's certainly an idea, now. We couldn't find any likely motor wheel tracks down the side road here. A boat waiting, you see. What time about would this be, sir?" "Oh, about 12:30, she said." "Ah." The sergeant continued to regard Mr. Witch with an air of distant speculation, while at the same time his hand went mechanically to his mysterious pocket. "I suppose you didn't by any chance happen to be in the neighbourhood yourself at about that hour, sir?" The perfect respect of the tone could not wholly disguise a certain significance in the question, and Willie Witch looked up to meet the sergeant's eyes on level terms.
Enderley also found something arresting in the sudden tension that seemed to have involved two of his guests, while Carrados continued to gaze into unseen space with the faint half-smile of placid contemplation. Myra alone appeared to have no interest in the passage, and her face was turned away, but her lips were tight-pressed to hold back a cry of generous warning, and her heart was thudding like an engine beat. For in a flash her eyes had followed Lapworth's, and in a flash had seen on her spruce guest's extended foot a boot with identical pearl buttons, of which the upper one was missing. The gap between the question and the answer was almost as long as it takes to tell of it, for with their eyes meeting, Witch paused to consider his reply, as though a thought urged caution. "What do you quite mean by that?" he asked guardedly. "You know, of course, that I live in the neighbourhood. Do you mean, was I at home?" "Not exactly, sir," replied the sergeant. "You might have been passing this very house on your way home, and thought you saw or heard something suspicious here, and come nearer to investigate. Or you might have had a dog stray into this garden, and come in to call it back, or a dozen things. What I should like to know is, did you come into this house or garden last night for any purpose?" "I did not," said Witch, his face relaxing into something like an amused grin. "What is more, Sergeant, I have never before been in this house or garden in the course of my long and industrious life." "Well, that's quite definite, sir," Lapworth admitted. "In the circumstances, would you mind stating where you were between the hours of 11 last night and 2 o'clock this morning?" To those who knew him pretty well, young Mr. Witch was something of a puzzle, and they complained that you never knew how he would take it, and whether the fellow was quite the fool he sometimes seemed. "In the circumstances, Sergeant, seems to imply the existence of certain conditions of which I have no knowledge," he now replied. "Should I ever find myself in the dock of the Old Bailey, charged with the murder of a constable, or before the Surrey Petty Sessions, accused of appropriating Mr. Enderley's ancestral plate, either of those eventualities would constitute an aggregation of circumstances that would enforce my acquiescence. At present, I fail to see any reason why I should render an account of my trivial life and movements." Sergeant Lapworth took out an irreproachably white pocket-handkerchief and wiped his face profusely. "Very good, sir," he remarked, with dark significance. "Should you have any objection to my comparing this form—" Here the sergeant dramatically produced his first exhibit. "With the boots you are now wearing?" "Not the least," replied the buoyant young man, raising his right foot to facilitate the operation. "Though I must protest against the attention thus gratuitously directed to my very unprepossessing footwear. Anything to assist the legitimate ends of justice, but not," he added severely, "of mere vulgar curiosity." Without deigning to reply, Sergeant Lapworth went down on one knee, and from that position fitted the paper impression against the proffered boot. It was at once plain to everyone that the two outlines coincided perfectly. But an even more significant piece of evidence was to emerge, for as the sergeant performed this office, he slyly inserted a nail in the angle of the instep, and an appreciable sprinkling of white peppered soil fell down into his hand. "I must call your attention, sir, to the fact that this earth from your boot appears to correspond with the soil of the garden here." "I say," exclaimed Mr. Witch, aghast. "I am sorry, Mrs. Enderley. Bringing stuff like that into your pretty room." Then, with a bright look of toleration, "But I expect you know what servants are." "Lastly," said Sergeant Lapworth, with admirable composure, in spite of a rather flushed complexion, "I shall be glad if you will look at this button, which corresponds exactly with those on your boot, where one is missing." "Thank you," replied young Mr. Witch, passing it back again. It's very good of you to have kept it for me, but it's really no use. It isn't a button you sew on, but one of those metal shanked affairs, and the shank is broken." "Then I understand, sir, that you decline to assist us with any information." "Oh, no, you don't, Sergeant. Not if you understand the common or vernacular tongue, that is," retorted his antagonist. "So far, what I have declined is to give an account of my movements on the strength of an old button, hypothetically lost at some time from my boot, and a little piece of paper traced to measure. It may be the law that I have to, if anyone shows me those. I must look that up. But you may remember that the only reason for my being here was to bring you information." "Oh, yes," exclaimed Myra, completely won over by the suspect's ready nonchalance. "We are all sure that Mr. Witch is quite all right, Sergeant Lapworth, aren't we, Guy?" "Mrs. Enderley," put in Witch, gazing at her with melancholy admiration, "before I go, I must unburden my mind, and I'm afraid you may think very poorly of me in consequence. I did not purloin your silver, and I have not the faintest idea who did. Goodbye." "Must you really go?" she asked. "Please be sure and thank Lady Witch from me, won't you, and any Thursday." "If you would be so kind as to help a blind man to his car, Mr. Witch," interposed Carrados, and Enderley found his own proffered services quietly brushed aside. "You don't say you are!" exclaimed Witch. "I never tumbled to it. And that's your little jigger waiting, then? I'm looking forward to something on 4 wheels myself, but so far I have to be content with 2. "It's hardly worthwhile offering you a lift," said Carrados when they were in the road. "But if you don't mind, I should like to walk with you as far as your gate." "Righto," said Mr. Witch, wondering who this queer customer who had made up to him might be. "Lovely night, isn't it? What about your car?" "It will follow presently. My driver understands. I have been trying to think where we have met before. Are you by any chance the witch who made 49 for the rest against Lord's schools 5 years ago?" "Oh, I say!" exclaimed his companion, becoming quite boyishly shy at the reference to this exploit. "You don't mean to say that you remember that? Were you at Lord's?" "Yes. I am fond of the minor fixtures. I can hear more play in them than often comes out in first-class matches. We did not speak, but you passed, and I thought I recognized your step again. A Winchester fellow was commenting on the game for me. You were given run out." "You must simply be a walking Wisden, sir," said Witch, brimming with admiration. And then, with a curious intonation in his voice, he added, "But why given?" "I remember some reference to it. Were you out?" "As a matter of fact, I was not," he admitted. "I don't think you made any fuss about it. Quarrelled with the umpire, or groused about the pavilion?" "Well, should I be likely? It was cricket." "Yes. And now about this business." They had reached the gate of Trefusis, but the young man made no movement towards it, and presently they fell to walking slowly on again. "Well, that isn't so easy, not by a long, long way. I was taken by surprise, I must admit. I hadn't a notion that there'd be any trace. Of course, it would have been simple enough to tell the sergeant how it came about, if that was all." "You mean the lady in the case? Or, shall we say, the girl in the shoes?" "Partly. And then there is my mother. She would certainly have a heart attack if she found that William had been taking her neighbour's handmaiden out to midnight carnivals and other forms of penance." "Is that quite cricket?" "Well, not absolutely MCC, perhaps. But it isn't to be inferred that I had the inklingest of who she was at first. And Chloe really is an awfully pretty girl, you know. What has she let out?" "Nothing at all, so far as I am aware." "Well, then how on earth do you come to know of her?
And the shoes?" "Very much, I suppose, in the same way that Sergeant Lapworth has come to know of you and the boot. Because the traces are so obvious. I must say I think Chloe was a bit of a mutt to walk on the bed and then leave a button somewhere about. She might have learned better than that from the pictures, surely." Chloe naturally had not foreseen that the escapade would coincide with a burglary. "But I would not be too ready to blame her, my young friend," advised Carrados dryly. "The most disastrous blunder of all was made by someone else." "That's a straight one," said Mr. Witch. "What did I do?" "Suppose you tell me all about it," suggested Mr. Carrados, under the seal of confidence. "I don't mind. I was going to see a lawyer first thing tomorrow to find out what I'd better do to circumvent the forces of law and order. Perhaps you could advise me." "Perhaps I could," admitted Carrados. "At all events, I will." "There really isn't very much to tell," said young Mr. Witch pensively. "I happened to be on the river alone a few months ago when I noticed a dazzling creature watching my feeble efforts from the bank. To have a nearer look, I landed and asked her if she was not, excuse me, Miss Prendergast. She said no, but how curious, she had been almost sure that I was a certain Mr. Johnson. This constituting a deputy introduction on established lines, I prevailed upon the bright vision to go for a short cruise, and even to accept some slight refreshment of a light and portable nature. Under the auspices of the gods, the idyll proceeded with exemplary propriety to run its normal course. So far as I was concerned, the chief attraction was the extreme likelihood of detection, and the certainty that everyone concerned would impute the very worst motives to my conduct when they did find out. On our usual evening last week, I was indulging the delightful being's passion for a harmless beverage known as Tango Teaser, when she espied a handbill announcing a cheap fancy dance at one of the public halls a few miles away, and artlessly exclaimed, "I should love to go to one of those." Of course, there was only one humanly possible reply to a heart cry like that, and I gallantly made it. "And I should love to take you. Why not?" To this she said that it was absolutely impossible, and we fell to making the arrangements. She was to creep out quietly at a side door after the others had gone to bed, lock the door after her, and bring the key, and meet me at our usual trysting place, a spot a few hundred yards from our respective abodes. I would be there with my iron steed, and on the pillion thereof would whirl her into fairyland. Everything went off as per schedule. The only contretemps was that Chloe— have I mentioned that the heroine was Chloe, by the way— ripped one of her shoes across, and thus passed automatically into the retired list. I confess that I was surprised at the consternation the mishap occasioned the sweet chit, and then she told me. Ashamed at the deficiency of her own pedal outfit, she had surreptitiously borrowed a pair belonging to her mistress. Detection would now inevitably follow. Disgrace, possibly dismissal, sighs, tears, heavens, reproaches. Again, I did the insane chivalrous thing, and swore to replace the shoe within 12 hours, or perish. The rest is obvious. Chloe knew where they had been bought, a shop in Oxford Street, and I was to hie me off at dawn and duplicate them. As there would be the business of giving the shoes the necessary wear, it would be simpler to keep only one, and this I was to put into a clump of ivy on the garden side wall. But when it came to parting, a difficulty arose. It was essential for me to have the split shoe as a pattern. I could not allow the fair penitent to walk stocking-footed along the stony road, and it wasn't wise to risk being seen together any nearer our houses. The simple way out was for me to lend her one of mine, and this I recovered from the ivy bush when I put the other one in. And there, Mr. Carrados, you have the whole egg in a nutshell. "Everything went off all right, then?" inquired Carrados maliciously. "Like a clock. I obtained the exact thing in the exact size, scrubbed it down to the exact appearance of the other, and put in the old lace.
The superfluous shoe was flung over into an orchard somewhere Isleworth way. There was nothing much in all that. But now you see why it was impossible to satisfy Sergeant Lapworth's inopportune curiosity. You may perhaps find it difficult to satisfy one or two other people as well. Did Chloe say anything when she let you in just now? Oh, why, yes. It struck me as ungracious at the time. The angel looked at me very weirdly and just said, "Idiot." I thought she must be overwrought. I think it very likely. I told you that there had been other blunders besides Chloe's. What she wished to indicate, by a single appropriate word, my budding Lothario, was that you had thrown away the wrong shoe, with the consequence that Mrs. Enderley is now on the verge of hysterics at an apparent miracle. "No," exclaimed Witch incredulously. "I could not. And yet, surely— Oh, good Lord, I did! I kept them to make a pair, the new one and the other, instead of— Well, I am a prize fathead. What will happen now?" "What? Why, the extreme probability that you have had your trouble for nothing, and that Chloe will be sacked after all." "Oh, I don't think that. Not after seeing Mrs. Enderley. You and Chloe both misjudge her strangely. She seems the jolliest sort of girl to me. I bet she'll understand." "I'll bet she will," assented Carrados grimly. "And when she understands that her pretty servant has been wearing her things, sneaking out at nights, to say nothing about giving burglars the chance of sneaking in, to foot it at dance-halls with the young spark from next door but one, you may not find her quite so sympathetic as she was half an hour ago. If she doesn't take the opportunity of calling upon Lady Witch about it, I'm badly out." "Oh, it's a mug's business," said Mr. Witch, with a qualmish note in his voice. "What had I better do?" "What you had better do is to leave it in my hands, and agree to my condition." "What condition?" "That you never go gallivanting with Chloe again. You both don't mean anything, but suppose you did happen to get the girl discharged with a very dubious character. Should you see any alternative to behaving either as a fool or a knave, to put it right?" "Phew!" exclaimed Mr. Witch, easing the collar against his neck. "That's heart-to-heart stuff. Well, if you can bring it off, I'm good for my part. Chloe certainly is a dazzling thing, but strictly between ourselves, her mind is little more than an assortment of obsolete film captions." When Mr. Enderley returned from business the next day, Myra greeted him with a subdued note. It was plain that the excitement had quite worn off. "If Mr. Carrados is really going to be useful to you, Guy, of course I shall do my best to amuse him. But I wonder all the same if he is going to make a practice of dropping in every evening." "How so?" demanded Guy. "He rang me up this afternoon and hoped that we should both be in later, as he would like to call. I had to say we should be charmed." "Well, just as well you did, my lady," remarked Guy. "Do you know that quite important people have a most extraordinary opinion of the man, and I am told that Scotland Yard will do anything to oblige him. That's what I've come across today." "My gracious!" said Myra, deeply impressed. "It's just as well I phoned. Talking about police, I met Sergeant Lapworth in the road this morning, and he seemed very odd. He said they had received instructions to go slow in taking any steps." "That ought to suit them down to the ground," suggested Guy, pessimistically. "We don't look like seeing any of our plate again, old girl." "Well, I don't know, Guy. It struck me that Sergeant Lapworth knew more than he would tell. He said that they expected developments." "It used to be, we're investigating a clue," said the unimpressed gentleman. Mrs. Enderley had named 9 o'clock as a convenient hour, and with the busy man's punctuality, 9 o'clock found Mr. Carrados walking up the Holmcroft garden path. Looking out, the lady of the house felt a pleasant access of importance, arising from the notable proportions of the car waiting at her gate. "How nice of you to come again," she exclaimed playfully. "After the alarms and excursions of yesterday, I hardly dared to hope it." "Oh, yes," he replied prosaically. "Your husband and I have some small business details to discuss." "Of course," she assented quickly. "I am going to leave you at it. But first," he continued, "I have a bargain to offer you." "Offer me? How exciting! Whatever can it be?" "You really want to get your silver back again?" "Why, naturally. Guy tells me that we shall only receive about half the value, the way our policy goes. Isn't it, Guy?" "I'm afraid it is," admitted her husband. "And that's only money. To both of us, many of the things are priceless." "While you have no particular affection for that odd pair of shoes." "Shoes? Oh, those! How ridiculous, Mr. Carrados. You are not coming like an up-to-date genie to offer silver plates for old shoes, are you?" "You have guessed. But there's always a catch about these attractive bargains, you remember. If you agree to let the shoes go, everything connected with them goes also. You have no curiosity, make no inquiries, entertain no suspicions. It is to be as though they, and all that appertains to them, had never been." "I wonder if I understand," mused Myra, with a sharp little look in his direction. "I think you do," replied Carrados. "You are, forgive the homely phrase, no fool, Mrs. Enderley. If you do not quite understand yet, it's only because you have not had time to think about it. You soon would." "All right, I'll take it," said Myra, with a very sporting air. "But do you mean that you actually know now where the silver is?" demanded Enderley. "I know where the silver is," Carrados admitted. "Where?" exclaimed two simultaneous voices. "When you went off a few days ago, you expressed a wish as to where it might be, Mr. Enderley, didn't you?" "What was that?" asked Myra, from whose mind the malediction had apparently faded. Her husband, on the contrary, remembered very well, and he coloured at the recollection. "I am sorry to be reminded of that," he said moodily. "Something happened to put me out, Myra, and in a moment of irritation, without meaning it, I said I wished the stuff at the bottom of the river. That's all." "Yes, that's the way with you impulsive people, as we genii are always finding. You want a thing, and then discover that you don't. Well, my friend, you have got your wish, willy-nilly. The stuff is at the bottom of the river." "What a lark!" exclaimed the lady. "The burglars dropped it or hid it there?" said her husband, keenly intrigued. "How on earth did you find that out?" "The burglars had nothing to do with it, because there was no burglar, no burglary," was the reply. "Oh, but I say! Besides, it's gone. No, Mr. Carrados, and then the side door key, you know." "Hush," said Carrados mysteriously. "That doesn't count. The side door key went, according to our bargain, with the shoes." "Very well," acquiesced Myra, with something very like a giggle. "But if there was no burglar, how did the silver get into the river?" "How?" Carrados raised an accusing finger, and slowly brought it dead level on his hostess. "How? Behold the culprit. You, my dear lady, threw it there." Moved by a common impulse, Guy and Myra came slowly to their feet. Looking at Max Carrados's quietly smiling face, it seemed impossible to believe that to know what to think. "I threw it there?" articulated Myra queerly. "You deliberately cast the damned stuff in. Rising in the dead of night, Without staying to put on slippers, or to cover those inadequate garments that are no longer the prerogative of my sex, you crept down, carefully replaced the silver lying about, took up the burden, let yourself out by the French window in the drawing-room, crossed the lawn, reached the silent river, and, with a sigh of relief at accomplishing so meritorious a task, tipped the whole bag of tricks into the water. All in a profound sleep, of course. By the way, I hope your feet are better today." Myra sat down again, with a strange look in her eyes. "But I could not even move the box," she whispered. "Not when you are awake," he replied, becoming grave again. "And do you know why that is? It is because you know that you cannot, and so, your slavish body assenting, you really cannot. But in your sleep you do not know it. Your unbound mind admits no limits, and so—" "Do you know," interposed Enderley, sagely, "I've heard something like that several times lately. I suppose there may be something in it after all." "Anyway," said Mr. Carrados, "there is one thing you can congratulate yourself on. A wife who carries out her husband's slightest wish, even in her sleep, is a woman in 1,000. You've been listening to a bite-sized audiobook, read by me, Simon Stanhope. If you enjoy these stories and would like to help me to keep producing new content, you can find links in the video description to my Patreon page or to buy me a coffee. Another way to support me is through my Bandcamp page, bitesizedaudio.bandcamp.com, where you can hear my narrations of many more classic short stories, as well as purchase and download them to keep. This recording is copyright Bitesized Audio 2025. Thank you for listening.